Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we will continue our reading of The Demon Priest by Jim Burroughs. We return to the present day and to the demon priest trying to make a place for himself in New Acadia. Chapter 10. Chaos returns to St. Michael's. It took us a few days to get everything together for the big meeting at St. Michael's, but a lot of people pitched in and things were going pretty well for a while. Father Gregory talked to the diocesan bishop and convinced him that the church showing up to make trouble for a non-denominational church wouldn't look good, and he'd agreed to keep Schiller away. Maddie and Chief Lafort agreed to keep Falcon's presence minimal, just Maddie and her partner, but have their operations team on standby just in case. The father said he didn't want the media inside with cameras and stuff, but agreed to meet with the press afterwards and even do a couple of TV interviews in exchange. The lawyers had a first cut at paperwork based on what those of us who'd been involved so far had decided, so that they could get it all done pretty quick, for lawyers, once the father figured out if anything needed to be changed after the big meeting. So yeah, it all looked pretty good, at least for a while. I don't know if angry Reverend Schiller had anything to do with it or not. I kind of think he probably did. He's a real angry kind of guy, but just as we were finishing a slightly late breakfast, the troubles started. The first hint was when Henri came up to the father's quarters. "Excuse me, Father," he said, "there's a crowd starting to gather out in front of the church." "So soon? The meeting isn't for almost 2 hours." "Well, sir, they aren't here for the meeting. More like against." "Against it?" "Yes, sir, protesters. There are some with signs, and they seem to be organized. There's one fellow with a priest's collar. I expect he'd call it a minister's collar." "I suppose I ought to go see." By the time we'd gone downstairs and through the church to the main doors, it wasn't just the handful of protesters that Henri had seen. He said the crowd had doubled while he was inside, and a TV news van had pulled up, and people were getting out. As we walked down the steps, the protesters started yelling, "Satan, go home! No church for Satan! Down with the devil!" Just then a police car pulled up right in front of the church. 2 cops got out. One of them started telling the protesters to stay on the sidewalk and not block the footpath to the church. The other came down the path to us. The father had us wait for her at the foot of the stairs. "Good morning, sir," she said when she got to us. "I assume you want them to stay off your property like before." "If you can manage that without too much trouble." "I think we can do that. You know how big a crowd to expect?" "I'm afraid I wasn't expecting this. Not specifically. I knew that there could be those who would take exception, and they would probably make themselves known. But just now, no, I'm sorry. The police are probably better at predicting this than I am." About then I saw T.C. drive past and turn toward the parking lot. "Do you know what triggered them this time, sir?" she asked. "I've invited my neighbors, the old congregants of St. Michael's, those who'd come to me for help in the past, and any others who are interested, so that I can explain my plans to reopen St. Michael's as a church." He gestured to the signs the protesters were bringing out. They said stuff like, "Don't let St. Michael's go to the devil," "No satanic church," and "Go back to hell." It would seem that the word has gotten out in a distorted fashion, and they are misunderstanding my intent. More protesters, reporters, and police were showing up all the time. T.C. and his Aunt June came down the steps to join us. The protester wearing the collar took out a bullhorn and started to yell something, but the police near him made him turn it off. "We've been told they don't have a permit, so we can keep them from using that thing, making speeches and so on, but the word is that for now they can gather on the sidewalk as long as they don't block the way or your path," explained the policewoman. "I understand, officer. I appreciate your help, and I'm sorry if what I'm doing here makes too much work for you." Hey, she shrugged. I always thought that too much work was better than too little. It's a job and keeps food on the table. It's more than that, officer. It's service and should be honored. Well, thank you, Father, she said. As she turned to leave, she tipped her hat. Well, touched its brim. I guess you call that tipping your hat. Not sure why. During the next hour, a few of our people, the ones like Mrs. Morrow and Mrs. Johnson, who tend to help out around the church, started showing up. The crowd hassled them enough that TC and Selina went out to try and stand up for them, but the police took charge and moved the crowd to the sidewalk on the other side of the road. No hassling St. Michael's parishioners, they said. Hassling church ladies isn't cool. This didn't quiet the protesters or please the reporters who got moved either. One news team did get the police to compromise. They let them park on our side of the road so long as they stayed in the van. They opened doors on both sides of the van and pointed cameras at both the church and the protesters on the other side of the street. Most of the news vans parked on the side streets, though. Henri and a bunch of the church ladies worked on giving St. Michael's a good cleaning to get it ready for the meeting. Since most of the ladies were part of Ms. Morrow's choir, they started singing hymns. That really riled up the protesters outside. They started yelling and chanting and then singing hymns of their own. June, Mrs. Morrow, decided the only way to deal with that was to join them in singing the same hymns. The protesters stopped singing and went back to yelling and jeering. Father Gregory commended the choir, but suggested that despite the value and intent of the hymns, the singing was becoming provocative and maybe should be saved for later. Somewhere, voices chittered. I had a very bad feeling and went back to the parish house for some milk with olive oil and honey and maybe just a little bit of the white rum. When I got to the parish house, I spotted the kid, Luca, and Tomas hanging out in the parlor that's the main room downstairs. Well, I saw the kid for a moment, then, well, you know. Hey, Lee, called Luca. I hope it's okay for us to hang out here. Tomas wanted to come, but it looked enough like something was going to blow. I talked him into hanging out back here. He's still got a lot of healing to do. She's been a real pain in the ass about it. I told her I'm fine, Tomas piped in. He didn't look fine. Better than when they carried him to the ambulance back during the first fight with the Devilheads. But basically, not dead and not about to die are better than that, too. And that isn't a great reason to be up and around. Sure, I was about to make myself some milk and honey. Can I get you one? Get one for him, said Luca. Tomas glared at her, muttering something about Mammy under his breath. I wasn't so sure bringing him one was a great idea. I made 3. I figured Luca or the kid might try one. I set it on the table and handed one to Tomas. He took it and sipped at it. Mine was the only one with rum. Once I finished it, I headed back to the church. I noticed that some of the drink on the table was gone. Must have guessed right about the kid. When I got back to the church, the front pews were beginning to fill up. It looked like a lot of people were interested in seeing St. Michael's open up again. And it sounded like there were quite a few that had serious objections. There was a steady beat of protesters chanting in the background. T.C., Selena, and several of the outcasts were acting as ushers, seeing people to their seats and checking out the crowds when they went to escort the next. Maddie was talking with the father for a while, but took an aisle seat at the front on the left, where she had a clear path to either vestibule. The meeting started out well enough. Father Gregory welcomed everybody and thanked them, and then set out his ideas for how he might turn part of his home, the main part of St. Michael's, into a non-denominational church. There was a lot of nodding of heads and agreeable mm-hms. After a while, he started to explain just how non-denominational he meant to be, using a story. He told us about he and Reverend Whitcomb met almost a century and a quarter ago. That priest had challenged him to change his life for the first time in thousands of years. When I agreed to repent, he explained, he offered to absolve me, but he wasn't sure that he had the authority to do so. The reason, he said, was that I'm not sure that he died for your sins. Mankind's, yes, but you're not human. Still, he was convinced that every penitent ought to be absolved, that we all ought to have a second chance, even me. The father was pacing now in the choir area. That act of compassion, of grace, of a human reaching out a helping hand to a fallen angel, for lack of a better term, it changed both our lives. It was outside the teachings of his church, the church that I was eventually baptized and ordained in. We were in uncharted territory, and I am again today. I've been willing to operate as a priest, as part of a human church in the past under their authority. But to open up St. Michael's as a church in my home, I just don't feel that I can claim to do it in any way in their behalf. Then don't do it, demon! Don't desecrate this church! St. Michael's of all places! Yelled a man a few pews back over on the right by the chapel. Do you know who St. Michael is? He stood up. Do you see him there? He pointed at the statue of St. Michael above the chapel altar. Do you see him with his sword at the throat of the devil? Would you defile this place named for him, this sacred place? Silence, demanded Father Gregory, and the man fell silent. This is my home, and while I welcome questions and points of view that disagree even profoundly with mine, your behavior is not acceptable. Hold a civil tongue, or if you cannot, depart. The man started angrily, but then he stopped and turned to leave the pew, and a look of fear just swept all over him, like voices were making him do something that he really didn't want to do. He walked slowly down the aisle and then out of the church, looking more and more scared with each step. Father Gregory took a deep breath with his eyes closed and then spoke. I'm sorry. I should not have done that. I was just telling you how someone, a human, a priest, challenged me to exercise my free will, to not be confined to absolutes, solely good or absolutely evil. He taught me that we each can choose, even those of us who... He taught me the importance of free will. I should not have done that. Lots of people started murmuring then. Everyone seemed to have something to say, but we didn't get to find out what, because that's when it started going bad outside. There'd been a lot of noise from the protesters outside for a while, chanting and stuff, but it was kind of monotonous and we were all ignoring it. You can shut out voices easy enough if it's the same old, same old. But all of a sudden things changed. They weren't all chanting together. No, now they were like really scared voices and angry ones and people all talking at once. I was sitting in the back near the vestibule, so I got out of my pew and headed towards the doors. I really didn't like hearing Father Gregory talk that way about himself. Selina, TC, and a couple of other outcasts were standing by the doors, keeping an eye out on what was going on out on the street. Looking out past them, I could see that minister guy, the one who'd had the bullhorn. Calm down, stay back, called a cop over his megaphone. He was possessed, cried the minister, using the bullhorn. Are you going to let them... And his bullhorn went silent. While the minister had been yelling, I saw TC gesture just before the bullhorn went nuts. TC, said Selina in a kind of loud, angry whisper. What? He said, backing up to look at her and shrug. What was I supposed to do? Let him go on like that? Don't use your powers. It'll provoke them. Hey, he shrugged again. Maybe it just broke, you know? Just hope they believe that, the cops. More demon magic, yelled a deep, loud voice in the crowd. A big guy pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He was wearing a black devil head t-shirt. You'd know, wouldn't you? Cried another voice from the crowd. The big guy stepped down onto the street and turned back to face the crowd and yelled, Hey, what do you mean by that? Your shirt. Yeah? You want to make something out of it, huh? All right, you, called the cop, walking toward him, all purpose-like. The big guy turned toward the cop. Then a woman's voice called out from the crowd, Leave him alone. Then she stepped out of the crowd, setting one foot on the street. Yeah, she was wearing a devil head shirt, too. It kind of figured. Don't let him get away with it. He possessed that guy, called someone in the crowd. All I could see was that guy's head and shoulders, but yeah, he was wearing a black t-shirt, probably with a devil head. Selina laid her hand on TC's arm. "Hold," was all she said. He did, but another outcast, a really big guy with huge hands, bigger than my head, started to speak up. "But," was all he got out before Selina glared at him, and he shut up. "No more, Bruiser," she ordered. "All right," he said. "Back on the sidewalk," ordered the cop. "Stick it, Popo," said another guy in a black devil head tee, shoving the cop. "Why are you protecting the devil? Why didn't you protect this guy? Devil possessed him. We got our rights. Protect and serve, damn it!" The crowd started to step out onto the street. "This is the police. You are ordered to stay on the sidewalk on your side of the street." That seemed to slow the crowd down, at least a bit, but not the devil head guys. They just kept coming our way. The outcasts went out to meet them. TC threw off Selina's grip on his arm, and then she followed him, along with the kid, the huge guy, Bruiser, and a couple of others. Tomas and Luca came around the side of the church from the parish house. Bruiser and the big devil head guy were the first to meet. Their guy turned gray and stony as he ran our way. Bruiser just leaned down as he charged, slammed his shoulder into the other guy's gut, straightened up, and slammed Rocky, or whatever they call the big guy, down into the ground. And I mean into it. He made a crater when he hit. Another one of the devil heads threw a ball of lightning at Bruiser, but Luca put up one of her blue energy shields to protect him. When the blue lightning hit her shield, Luca jerked a bit, and bits of lightning started to crackle around her. She smiled. I really wouldn't want someone to smile like that at me. She started to run right at the ball lightning guy. He conjured up another couple of balls, one in each hand, and he ran at her. The Rocky guy got up, rolled his shoulders, and wound up to punch Bruiser. The cops were calling out, "Cease and desist! Everyone stand down!" Just as Rocky was throwing that huge roundhouse at Bruiser, Richard the True Knight landed between them right out of nowhere. I'd have sworn there wasn't enough room for someone to get between them. No way. But the knight just fell out of the sky between them, spun, slamming and shoving them with his hands, and threw them apart. He's got second or third generation super soldier powers, and they say that True Blue did something to make him even stronger, but tossing those two huge guys apart like that was pretty impressive. The ball lightning guy tossed his lightning at Luca, but nothing got through her shields. Well, probably not. There were a lot more blue sparks all over her afterwards. Bruiser roared and started to get up, and the True Knight turned his head to see. That's when Rocky, or whatever, curled up and then slammed his feet into the ground. The ground shook, and Rocky leaped to his feet. He moved pretty quick for a big guy, as they say. He backhanded the knight's helmet and sent him flying into Bruiser. That's when I noticed Chief Lafort, just walking up behind Rocky. She was all dressed in blue uniform slacks and a crisp white shirt, just like she'd been when she interviewed us at Falcon headquarters. She just walked right up behind him, grabbed his belt in one hand, and lifted him up. He started to fall backwards towards her, and she caught him with the other hand between his shoulders, turned, and tossed him into a group of 3 devil heads going our way. "They said," she called out in this really bossy police voice, "stand down!" That was the first time I ever saw the Woman of Bronze in action. Wow. She was facing the devil heads and the crowd behind them. The True Knight dusted himself off and faced us in the church. "Stand down," he echoed. Everyone looked like they might just back down. A few on both sides were backing apart. Bruiser stood up, rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and was wiping the back of his hand across, well, most of his face. He's got really big hands. Rocky was trying not to step on his guys too much as he stood up. He wasn't doing a very good job. That's when Lionheart landed, right in the middle of everything. Like most super soldier metas, he doesn't actually fly, just leaps. They say he'd been in his penthouse 50 floors up at the Lyonnais, a good 3 blocks away, when he got word of what was going on at the church. He leapt up to get a good arc to the church. The fight may still have been going when he leapt, but 7 or 8 seconds is a pretty long time. Try counting it out. 1, 2... Well, you get it. So everyone's dusting themselves off when a couple 100 pounds of the world's richest superhero slams into the ground right in the middle of it all. It seemed like a really, really long time until Chief Lafort, the cops with the megaphones, and Father Gregory using his voice, the one you kind of can't resist, got everyone quieted down again. By now, there were more outcasts, more devilheads, more cops, more reporters, and TV cameras, and a bigger crowd all gathered around. After the fighting stopped, the True Knight started yelling at Lionheart, telling him that the last brawl was his fault, and Lionheart was yelling back about how the Knight and Miss Goody Two-Shoes, I think he meant True Blue, were a couple of useless interfering do-gooders. Chief Lafort walked up and grabbed Lionheart's shoulder, pulling him away from the Knight. "I've got a good mind to—" That was as far as she got when Lionheart's fist caught her right in the jaw. She went down hard. Everyone just stood and stared. The world's richest superhero had just decked the head of the local Falcon office. It was really quiet as Father Gregory strode over. "Please remove yourself from my property," he said to Lionheart. "The devil's trying to possess Lionheart!" yelled someone on the crowd. Rocky charged the father, who leaned back and swept him aside right into the True Knight. Chaos broke out everywhere. Well, except for Lionheart, he just walked away, ignoring everyone. But except for him, the whole fight broke out again. That's when I spotted him, Dr. Apollo, the guy who started all this by kidnapping Theo. He was standing in the crowd off to the right where the cops were holding back the onlookers. He wasn't wearing his lab coat or anything, just slacks and a pale blue shirt. I walked down the steps, past Luca and the ball lightning guy wrestling on the ground, lightning crackling all around them, and then this devilhead guy with, like, powered gauntlets just looking down at them as they fell apart. There were others fighting, but I wasn't paying attention to them. The evil doctor was right there, by the police barrier. "You!" someone yelled. Apollo turned to look at me. "You!" I yelled. "You're Dr. Apollo, the plague doctor." He stammered. "Arrest him, officer! He kidnapped us!" I yelled at a cop a few feet away. The cop turned my way, and I grabbed the doctor by his shirt front. He pulled back and started, I don't know, turning kind of blue and a little like Luca's shield. All the voices were yelling. He was yelling. I was yelling. The cop was yelling. My hands were all red as I jerked him toward me, twisting to yell at the cop to arrest him. And that's when you showed up. We'll find out who Lee is addressing next time.